G'day, leaders. One of our listeners reached out to us to get us to work with his team. And when I spoke to Prince Seeva, what a fantastic name, the founder and managing director of Comoda Design and Renovation, I asked him about his background and how he came to be the leader of a construction company in Brisbane. And his story captivated me, so I begged him to tell it on our podcast. Occasionally you'll meet someone with a level of integrity that's rarely seen in this world. And Prince has a level of integrity that I've rarely seen. Prince was working as a salesman for another construction company when he realised that the company he represented was doing the wrong thing by its customers. They were about to be completely ripped off so that the owner could flee the country with all their money. Now, Prince, rather than walking away from the situation, decided to do something about it so that the clients didn't suffer. And this was the birth of a now very successful construction company in Brisbane called Comoda. You'll hear how, as a child, he escaped a civil war where the army tried to burn down a house with him in it, and how subsequently he developed an amazing attitude of pushing through no matter what the obstacle. Quite an extraordinary leader, and I trust you'll enjoy hearing his story as much as we did. Cheers.
Why did it count backwards? I don't know, that we're now recording.
What? Hello, Captain.
What do I...
Come fly with me, let's fly away.
What are we going to talk about?
I don't know. So, leadership, life, and everything else.
Yeah.
And we're live.
No, we're recording.
And today we've got a special guest. I'm very excited for this podcast. Prince, welcome to the podcast and thank you for coming on.
No, thank you for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
It's a pleasure.
Now, we met when you reached out after listening to our podcast and we were you wanted to talk about what we do and that sort of stuff. And then in our introduction, you started to tell me things about you, and you have an amazing story. So I begged you to come on our podcast, and you accepted. So thank you very much. People heard in our introduction what your background is and Comoda Designs, but what I'd like to ask you to do is to give us your story, to give a background to you, because when I was listening to your story, I was absolutely captivated, and I think there's a lot of lessons in your story that our listeners could learn from. So, to put you on the spot, if you could take us back to your childhood and then take us to how you got from where you were as a child to now running your own construction company. I'd love to hear that story.
I don't know. How much time do we have?
We've got as much time as we need.
It's been a colourful journey, to say the least. And, you know, I think a lot of things have come my way by chance. Some have been positive and others have been negative. And I think it's just about how I've kind of worked with what I've had at hand. And I don't believe I had any sort of philosophical background at any point in how I was dealing with it. I think I was just dealing with things as they came. And as I read a little bit more now and do a little bit more study, I think it sits in the Stoic realm of things.
Yeah.
So can you take us back to your childhood?
Of course.
So where you took me to.
Sure. So I was born in Sri Lanka.
Yeah.
In the 80s during the civil war that was happening from about 1983 is when it started. And we were born in I was born in a small village on the east side of Sri Lanka, and we had quite a comfortable life growing up. Our family had some rice fields that we owned, and my dad was an engineer in the area, and you know, we had a normal life. And it was in the midst of the civil war, but it hadn't peaked at the time. And there was one occasion that stood out on the 27th of October 1987. It's a vivid memory for me because it's I actually can recall every single detail of that date, of the day, from sight, smell, sound, everything. And there was a bomb that went off that unfortunately killed, I think, about 20 soldiers who were going on a march. And the army decided that they needed to go and find out who did this. And the way they were going to do that was they were going to go house to house. And
So
basically,
where were you when the bomb went off?
I was at my neighbour's house at 8:30 in the morning, and I can clearly hear them playing some sort of religious music at the time, and my brother and I were there, and I remember jumping across the moment. It's sort of like a sonic boom kind of feeling, and we hadn't experienced that before, and we knew it was bad.
How old were you?
6.
6.
Yeah, I was exactly 6, and we ran across and went in, and I think we didn't understand the magnitude of what had happened, but we knew it was something that was important. And later on, we found out that that was the biggest event to happen in that area. The army went door to door, and before they got to the house that we were living, my grandma's house, basically my grandma huddled us all into one room and put some bars across the door, and like she was quite a intelligent person. She's what she was, and she put us under the beds, straight in. All right, kids, under the bed. That's where you're going to go. And we didn't know how long we were going to be there, so we thought maybe a few hours or whatever. It so happened that we were there under that bed for about 10 hours, I would say.
Wow.
And there was a moment we could hear the army going through the house. You could hear them, boots and all, banging on the doors. You could hear them rifling through the house, and you knew that it's moments before they're going to come through. And I don't know, it's just vivid memories. For me, it's like things like, I need to pee.
Yeah.
And like, and there was like a little, like a 2-liter can of Anchor milk, that powdered milk. And there was like, okay, go in here. And, I can clearly see it, color, vision. I can see it. And there was moments where we were like, oh my God, there's a second door to this bedroom, and the key is always kept on the outside, and they're gonna come through that. And so this anticipation of when is it, not if it's going to happen, but when is it going to happen. And there was a break in silence at a particular point, and there was quiet, and I think we ventured out, and I think as a 6-year-old, these are scary things. And I remember walking out into this dining room, and there's a window there, and from that window you could see this little side street. And I remember looking straight at it. I could see a tank, and the tank was just turning its barrel, the gun barrel, and it was just doing that turn towards your house. And I was just like, oh my God, I can literally see it, and I could just see it slowly doing this turn, and we were ducking and hiding under the table, and then going back in. And there was, probably would have been about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I'd say. I can't quite remember, but there was a specific moment where we knew it had died down. They didn't come through the room, and we went out, and I could see the TV was like smashed. In the 80s, you guys may remember, the VCR was a precious item.
Yeah.
Precious item. As a kid, you get told, don't put your fingers in,
Yeah.
Don't put things in there. Like, it's just one of those things. And it was revered. And a memory that will last, I think, for the rest of my life will be seeing that VCR on the ground with a boot mark, like, stomped through it. And you could see these little black plastic wheels that pull the tape or whatever.
Yeah.
And it was all around the floor. And I could just, I said to my grandma, oh my God, the VCR is broken. They've done. That was the biggest thing, I guess, for me. That was that was the symbol of everything right, or everything good. And seeing it on the floor was kind of like a jarring thing of what was happening. And I remember my grandma saying, don't worry, Chaco Mama will fix it. My mum's brother, uncle, living about 10 doors away. And we didn't realize at the time he had passed away. They had killed him on that day.
Oh, no.
And so it was quite shocking.
So where was your grandmother when all of this was happening?
I was in my grandma's house.
But so was she stopping them coming into your room?
No,
or?
we just had barricaded one room,
Yep.
and it had big timber bars across it. These old, big, I don't know, teak bars maybe.
Yeah.
But whatever it was, they just probably went, I can't be bothered.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
We've tried and we can't be
So
bothered.
she was in the room with you?
Every single person was in the room. So a couple of my aunts, my brother, myself, there would have been about 5 or 6 people. Whoever was in the house at the time was in that one room.
Wow.
And we actually went out and saw that they had taken a little coffee table and taken all these brooms and sticks and stuff like that and created like a little teepee out of it and set it on fire.
Oh.
But it didn't catch on. You could see it had started to catch fire,
Yeah.
but it hadn't.
So they were going to try and burn
They were just going to burn the house down.
Wow.
Because it would have been an easy thing. You just go burn
To
it,
get rid
move
of,
on to the next one.
Yeah. Wow.
So it was, I guess that was a life-changing event for me. And we became instant refugees in our own country. So we, as Tamil speakers, predominantly in the north and east of Sri Lanka, the majority Sinhalese, great people, just happened to have a conflict at the time, and we were displaced, I guess, from that point on, and so we just became refugees in Colombo, and we were helped out by friends and family, and had to sort of find our feet, and it was a bit of a story after that.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
Wow.
what you were telling us before we started recording that you considered yourself wealthy, well off, never having to worry about next meal, next day or anything in your village, and then being thrown into now being on the other side.
The refugee.
Yeah. Then that would have, even as a 6-year-old, I can imagine that would have been confusing as well.
Yeah, it was very confusing because I think our concept of what a refugee is can be skewed. We think a refugee is a person in another country, a foreign country.
Yes.
And the concept of being a refugee within your own country is actually worse for a person to conceptualize or for a child to actually quite understand.
Yeah.
And I think that would have been one of the hardest things for me, being in an area where you go, well, I don't have the comforts of home, or I'm living now in someone's spare room because through the kindness that they're offering us.
Yeah.
And I think that was quite a shock to the system. If I look back at the way that it affected different people in the family, I think it affected everybody. Different people reacted to those events or events of that day in a very unique way. And
So you're one of 3. You've got an older brother and a younger sister.
That's correct. I've got an older brother who's 3 years old, 4 years old, 3 years older than me, sorry, and my youngest sister who is 3 years younger than me.
So it would have left a different mark on the 3 of you because of your age?
It did, and I think my brother and I were able to understand the events more.
Yeah.
For me, a really unique thing that happened was that my memory, I don't have a memory before that day in October 87.
Wow.
Like I cannot tell you a single event.
Yeah.
But I can tell you the events of that day in absolute detail. And whereas my brother, who was a bit older, has a bit more understanding, and I think it didn't affect him as much. I shouldn't say that, but it might have affected him differently.
Yeah.
And my sister was probably too young to understand what was happening, and she would have only
3.
realized. Yeah. She was only 3, and she would have only realized the effects of that quite later in her life.
Yeah. So from that event, your parents took you out of Sri Lanka, and where did you go to then?
So we didn't go out of Sri Lanka as a family. It was a time where, my dad had to look for a new job and different options. And he, it was quite, again, it's, I guess, luck or fate. My dad got offered a job in Papua New Guinea, just quite sheer luck, absolutely sheer luck for them to, want a person from the other side of the world to come in and work as an engineer on projects. And it changed our life. We thought that was our fate. Like that was, we now had to rebuild from a very negative sort of position, to then have this opportunity for my dad come up. It kind of helped us to change a few things. And so he got a job and they offered full schooling for the kids and a house and all of those things. And so he took it, of course. And we went to Papua New Guinea for a couple of years. And then after a few years, the area we were living in was quite remote in Papua New Guinea. And my parents had the wisdom to think that it would be best for us to retain some of our Sri Lankan culture and language and all of those things. And so they sent us to live with my grandma in Colombo in sort of the early 90s. Yeah.
So what was that like, going back to Sri Lanka after what you went through as a 6-year-old?
I think at the time I didn't really put too much thought to it.
Okay.
I was probably not able to understand all of those complexities, but we always lived in constant fear. So fear wasn't something that came and went. You live in a state of fear, and that's quite different. And so when you're in that state, you adapt to that state. You either shy away and crumble, or you will create avenues and I suppose different coping mechanisms of how to manage that. And you will somewhat try to assimilate as close as you can so that you're not going to stick out. I think that's one of the times where I could say, well, my ability to read the room and change and adapt to the situation was forged in those few years that I went back to Sri Lanka. Because we were at the height of the war at that time, mid-90s. There were bombs going off left, right, and center. Like, it was just horrific. And there was checkpoints, there was police blockades, they would do house-to-house checks, people would disappear. It was a time where you would go, wow, this is quite a situation. And being the minority meant that we couldn't speak up for ourselves, we couldn't defend ourselves as well as a native Sinhalese speaker could in Colombo, and that put us at a disadvantage. So we had to adapt.
Do you think moving also from your home initially and then being made a refugee to then moving to PNG and back again, as a child, did you kind of reinvent yourself every time? So you had that opportunity, even though it's massive change, you had that chance to kind of try out be someone else or kind of try on something new?
Yeah.
Did you?
It is good, great question, because as you were asking it, I was thinking, oh gosh, what did I do? And it's a simple thing would be like when I was living in PNG. I don't know if you guys know that the whole of PNG is a Queensland supporter. Like everyone at
Everyone's
PNG
wearing white and
is
gold.
is a Queensland supporter. No one's a blue supporter.
Yeah.
And it's funny. Like, I guess I had no context for it when I had just moved in, but I was also a Maroon supporter. I had never even watched an NRL game at the time, and you just adapt, right? You just go, well, that's just what I am now. And it was, even though, many years later, before I lived in Queensland, I had been a Queensland supporter for 30 something years now. There you go.
So were you considered exotic when you went back to Sri Lanka, that you'd lived, you worldly, and you'd then gone back? Or
I didn't really. One of the good things that my parents did, which again in hindsight now, I am very appreciative of them, was they made the decision that schooling in PNG at the time wasn't ideal, and they were willing to sacrifice living with their kids for the sake of sending them back to a country that they knew that someone else was also there to look after. But what they did, they invested every dollar they had to put us in the best school in Sri Lanka at the time.
Wow.
So if I think it, God, would I do that for my kids? That's a hard one right now. And I think, wow. So it's a tough one.
Yeah.
I've seen what my dad was making at the time, and it wasn't huge. And they put me in my brother, myself, and my sister, they put us in the best school. The president's daughter at the time was my classmate, sitting next to me. And so to go from this village child who was, kind of a refugee, to be able to come back to the same country, but to be placed in an elevated position of that nature, even though we didn't fit in, even though we weren't the right people for that school, we had to make it work, because that's just what we had to do. And I think we took the best of that opportunity. And, amazing that my parents had that foresight to be able to invest in their children's education like that.
Yeah.
So how did you find yourself in Australia? How did you come here?
To say that I didn't use the best of my schooling ability or opportunity is probably on the right track. My brother did exceptionally well and went on to study medicine, and he's a fantastic doctor right now in America. And whereas myself, I think I may have spent a lot of time or energy in discovering just talents within myself that were atypical to structured education.
Okay.
If that's the one way of putting it.
Yeah.
And in that pursuit, you are going to end up with outcomes that aren't going to be typical. So in exams and results, I didn't score as well. I think I remember saying to you, we have O levels and A levels there, the British system. And I did quite well in the O levels, and when it came to the A levels, I was playing all sorts of sport and all different things, and I was I just had different interests and different learning styles. I don't think it was suited. The typical style wasn't suited at the time, and I remember going to see our results at the principal's office. That's how we had to go and find our results. And I went with a couple of my friends, and I remember reading the results out, and it's one. I got an E, and an N, and a D. To this day, I don't even know what the hell an N is. I think it must be like not classified as anything. I don't even know. Anyway, from a scale of A to whatever, it's pretty bad. And I remember this friend of mine said to me, "Oh my God, Prince, you've reached the end."
Andy.
He said, "There is nothing, like, you're finished. This is the end for you." And I just remember thinking of it at the time, going, screw you.
Yeah.
That's what you think. And all my friends, they had done all their applications to universities and all of that sort of stuff. And I'd done mine hoping to go to like UK or wherever. And I just knew with those results I wasn't going anywhere. And so I went back, and the internet was quite new at the time, but we had, my parents again were happy to invest in technology and things. So we had the internet in 1996, and I decided that I will email every single university that I can find on the internet in any country I can find. And I just started emailing them saying, I know. It started with something like, I realize that I do not meet your criteria for admission. However, here are some, facts that I would like to present about myself, and here are, 5 different reasons why I think you should consider me, blah, 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 blah. And I just applied and applied and applied and applied and applied. I just kept writing emails non-stop because I was like, this doesn't cost me anything. I think I was in a room for like 4 or 5 days straight. I just literally replied. And the University of New South Wales actually sent me a reply and said, yes, you are correct. You don't meet any of our criteria. However, if you're willing to do 2 units that we offer as a bridging program, and if you pass those, we will give you a full entry into this course. And it was architecture, actually.
Wow.
Funnily enough.
Yeah.
I applied for anything. I didn't care what it was. And I guess then the next hurdle was, how was I going to fund this? So then I asked my uncle in Norway. He was working in Norway. And I said, hey, they just want a bank statement saying you're going to pay for me. I don't actually need you to pay for me. Just give me a bank statement and a letter saying you're paying for me. That's all I want. And so I just chucked it in, put the offer letter together, threw it in. And it's like, at the time, it was like late 1997. It's really hard to get visas, right? Especially out of a war-torn country. Just threw it in, and I don't know what happened. Somehow they were like, sure, here's your student visa.
Wow.
Yeah. And
good on you. You're giving me goosebumps.
Right before my...
I thought it was a great story, didn't I?
Just before my 18th birthday, I turned up in Sydney. And I was just like, okay, well, I guess I will figure it out from here. So, yeah.
Wow. The tenacity.
I know. I love that. Just you won't take no for an answer.
Yeah.
I couldn't. I had no choice.
So you came to Australia, you went to university, and I want to know the path from there to having your own construction company.
Gosh. I think it's like it. I didn't. Again, I think I did. More time was spent. Let me rephrase this. So, when I got to Sydney, I was like, you know what? I need to be as Australian as possible, as quick as possible, if I'm going to succeed. So I would get on the bus and just ride to random places, right? And I would take the ferry, go to Manly, I would go to Chatswood, I would go to all different places. And I would just take notes of different things and everything around me. And I'd watch a lot of like 80s TV shows.
Oh, I feel so sorry for you. I know what our shows were like back in the 80s.
Right? But then if I didn't have context, I wouldn't be able to have conversation.
Yeah.
So I went and I fully became a student of assimilation. And I thought, what do I need to do to be successful in the way that suits me?
Yeah.
Not by the standards of getting good grades and a job and, you know, going through the ranks. I couldn't see myself do that. So I just did it the way that I thought works for me. And I needed a job. And I thought, they're not going to hire like a foreign student that's like least in the pecking order. So I just went, I was telling Guy this story. I'd turn up to jobs, right? I'd put in for interviews and whatever, and I'd go there and I'd go, and I knew that it would clearly say, no, like we only want residents and citizens. And I thought, you know what? But if I could make them believe that I wasn't a student or wasn't a foreign person, then they wouldn't even ask the question. So they would bypass that anyway because they'd feel silly, right? So I'd say things like, oh, you know, when I was in like, oh, you know, how school is these days, or, you know, it's just, you know, the things that you get out of school are very different to what we learn in life. And I just throw in little sound bites in the interview. And to the point where the person interviewing would have been crazy to be like, are you a foreign student? And that's kind of how I got my first few jobs. And it just kind of goes from there. And so I worked in a couple of different industries while studying, and even studying, I did the longest route to a degree possible. I did.
So you did architecture, was your degree? Ah, okay.
So I had an enrollment into architecture, and then I think it's one of those things, you know, foreign students get this push that, you know, you have to study the things that suit a pathway to residency, and that's the most suitable. So I was like, okay, fine. And I enrolled in computer science, and I was like, I think I went to a computer lab one day, and I was like, oh my God, this is so not me. And so I think I did the first year of it, and I got through that. And I actually changed to a business and marketing degree. And then halfway through, I was like, wow, I think I want to do psychology. And I changed to a psych degree. And I think I was just going through this process of discovering what my niche was. But I think formalized education just wasn't it. I think it was this student of life type situation. And I think I'm really thankful for the variety of degree choices that I had and the courses that I did within it. You know, I did things like logic and cultural studies, and it was great. Like, I loved those. And ethics and all of those things were fantastic, but they never were set on one particular degree task. And so I took 6 years, and I could, just as I was about to finish, my grandma got sick in Sri Lanka, and it was a hard choice, but I decided to leave and go back and care for her. So I did that for a year before she passed away.
Yeah.
And and then it sort of changed where I was going, and then I had to reset again and go again.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. I could listen to your stories forever. So after losing your grandmother, the lady that barred the door that potentially saved your lives, so you came back to Australia after that, or?
Yeah, I worked in Sri Lanka for a year and a half after I went there, and I think that was one of the best couple of times. I worked for a travel company, and they would send me around the world to different travel shows. I went everywhere. And I would go to exhibitions, and I would have to talk about Sri Lanka as a travel destination. Isn't it funny how I am here going, it's wonderful. It was. In Sri Lanka is wonderful. I don't want anyone to think otherwise. I love Sri Lanka as a country. I love Sri Lankans as people. It's unfortunate that we've had conflict in the past. But I would stand up today and shout about the positives of Sri Lanka as a country, as a people, and as a nation. And I was quite happy to do that. And I went around at all different, locations to these travel shows. And I was actually sales manager for a very sort of a startup brand, which was SriLanka.com. And they were like, great, you've got some foreign experience. And, it was owned by someone I knew, and they said, there you go, you got a job, go make it work. And,
so your marketing degree pathway had come in handy.
Everything. Yeah. I would make appointments with the tourism minister and be like, hey, would you like to meet? And and they were like, what do you mean, like you're some 20-year-old person trying to meet with me? Like, I was like, because I didn't know any different.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that there was this whole hierarchy, and I didn't know these barriers. So I just went, hey, this is what I do. How about we meet for lunch? And they'd be like, sure. And that worked really well. I learned a lot, and I learned to manage people. They were really genuinely good people working for this company. And I didn't have a leadership style. I had no leadership. Well, they might disagree now if you go and talk to them. But at the time, I didn't know what I was doing, and I was leading the way I would have liked to be led myself.
Yeah,
and it was counter to what was culturally the norm. This hierarchy system, this whole calling people sir, and I was like, please don't call me sir, and all these different levels. And we made it very open, and it was a great culture that we brought through, and it showed through in the way that the employees interacted with clients and so on. And it was a startup, I guess, back in the day, early 2000s. And it was not until I met my wife and we decided that, I met my wife earlier, but my wife was very patient while I said to her, hey, I'm not moving to America for you. I met her, and she was studying in America at the time. I said, I'm not moving to America for you. You've got to move to Australia. And these are all the wonderful things about Australia. And she said, yeah, I'll make it work. And so she changed her degree and got a master's program and enrolled and came to Australia. And I went, you know what? I'm actually going to stay in Sri Lanka for another 1.5 years or so.
Oh, no. So you'd send her to Australia and you weren't going to be there?
No. And that's what happened. And she was very patient. And I said, look, once I get this company in some state that I can leave, I feel the responsibility for it. So, yeah, I did that for a couple of 1.5 years, 2 years roughly. And then we decided to move to Brisbane. I studied in Sydney, as I said, but we decided we wanted a neutral location that neither of us had any kind of advantage in. And we knew that if we placed ourselves in a neutral location, we would have to rely on each other. We would have to be there for each other. And I think that was one of the best decisions I ever made. Leaving the safety and the friends groups that I had in Sydney to come out here and sort of forge a path that we had to do it together, and I think that was fantastic.
Did you convert your wife to be a Broncos supporter?
She tries. She tries to be interested, but my kids are.
So you got into a company here in Brisbane, a construction company?
Yeah, that's how it actually went. That's how I got into construction. So I'm coming from this travel background. I've got no understanding of construction whatsoever. And I get a job with some friends of friends, and they kind of put me through, and there was like a connection to the people that own this company in Toowoomba, of all places. And they said, we're going to change the world in terms of how building and construction is being done. And so I started working for them, and it was good at the start. I think the travel was hard, but it quickly wasn't. I knew it wasn't what I wanted. But someone I respect a lot said once to me that to learn anything, you either have to have a lot of time or a lot of money, or you have to use other people's time or other people's money. And when I look back at that, I think the fact that I learned a lot of things about how not to do things.
Yeah.
And many times, we're always thinking about how to do things well. We're so positively orientated in our thinking that we neglect to understand the power of studying failure. And I think by chance I'm a student of failure.
That's great.
So that put me in. I left that job and moved to another construction job in Brisbane. That was a really well systemized company. I think systems is what I learned from those guys. They were on task. They were reading all the right books, and they had E-Myth and this and that, and everything was systemized, and they had all of the stuff lined up except ethics.
Okay.
And I learned everything about everything else, and then I went, but this doesn't sit right.
Yeah.
And it was proven right in the sense that in the end, one of the owners kind of took a bunch of money and fled the country and things like that.
Yeah.
And left a lot of people.
So you read the room early on them.
Well, I might have, but I had no choice. Again, we just had our first baby at the time, and how I got into construction, I guess, or how I got into my own business was not by choice. It's again by chance, and I was the salesperson for this company, and I was the one fronting clients and saying, we're going to do a fantastic bathroom for you, Guy and Michelle. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be X amount of dollars, and you can trust me to get this done for you. And they trusted me. They didn't trust the company, and I felt that responsibility. And there was a period where I knew that this wasn't going to work, and they weren't going to get what they were paying for. And just before it was going to all kind of turn, I knew that a couple of the clients I was talking to, maybe 3 of them, had paid a small deposit, let's say, right? And just about a week after, this company sort of shut down. He ran off and did all this stuff, and people would call me, right? And they say, "Hey, Prince, just checking in. When do you guys think you'll be starting?" And I just went, "Oh God, what am I supposed to? What do I do?" And so I said, "Okay, I called the plumber, and who I knew who was working there, and I said, 'Hey, mate, I've started my own company. I've got all these clients, lots of clients lined up. Do you reckon you want to work for me?' And he goes, 'Yeah, of course.' And then I said, 'Ooh, I don't have a tiler.' And he goes, 'Oh, don't worry. I'll get my cousin or my friend to come along.' And I was like, 'Well, we also don't have an electrician.' And he's like, 'Oh, no, I know this guy. We're sorted.' And then I went to the client, and I just said, I didn't have a company registered. I didn't have money to register a company. So, this is totally illegal, by the way. You can cut this out if you want. But
It's up to you.
Up to you, yeah.
A statute of limitations.
Yes, exactly.
I literally just gave them my personal bank account details, and I said, "Great, we'll be there on Monday." And I think I had like 3 or 4 jobs. And I said to the plumber, "Mate, I guess you're going to rip this bathroom out and you're going to have to frame it and sheet it, and we'll call your mate, the Tyler, and he can waterproof it, and the Sparky can put that in, and we're halfway there. And we just used all the old paperwork, and so we might have got the first one through, and we went, oh, okay. And then they were really happy, and then the second person was really, really happy, and went, oh wow. And I was like, this is more positive reviews than I heard when I was working for the actual company. And yeah, and then I just went, okay, well, I guess we can formalize this. And we did. I just registered a company online and did all those things. Had no idea what I was doing. And literally was myself sitting in a bedroom in my house and running this renovation company, which was totally...
Renovation startup.
Renovation startup. Yeah, and that's kind of how it started.
Yeah. And how did it get to the size and the success that it is now?
I'm very critical of myself, so I don't know, when you said success, I'm like, oof, are you sure about that? But I initially was always like, okay, well, we need to represent ourselves as big as we can. Like, so I had a company name. I was big on marketing. I had a nice brand. I had some really nice paperwork, and I thought, oh, you know what? I need some employees, but I can't really afford employees. So then I created some email addresses of employees, and I went, well, this is great because the interaction between these so-called employees and the clients will create this huge air of credibility. And so my accounts manager would email the client and say, hey, Guy, just following up on that invoice we sent, Prince is really looking to start this job soon. And that was all me. And
that's awesome. So did you have the email chain going through as well sometimes, where you'd email the other person in something and then...
Of course. This guy called John Swords, who I had...
John Swords?
John Swords was the accounts manager. And he was strict. He was very strict. He was on the ball as well.
Right.
He would always be sending me personal emails and go, Prince, this person hasn't made their invoice. I don't know if we can get this job out the door. Please let them know. Or vice versa. I'd be like, hey, John, what do you think? Do you think we can offer this discount? And he might reject it sometimes.
And then you'd forward these on to your clients.
And I'd say, look, I tried.
Brilliant. So how many different people were you at the start?
We had... Oh, I should say we. Gosh, that sounds like a schizophrenic.
I love it. Yeah.
This is great.
The company was just myself, but in the client size, I think there was about four
You were
employees.
4 different people,
4 different
emailing yourself. And, okay.
So how many other employees, apart from those 4, are there now?
So now we don't have those employees anymore.
You got to performance
You got
manage
rid of
them
them.
out.
We had to
yeah.
perform.
You consolidated them all into one person.
They just didn't fit with our culture and ethics and stuff. It kind of grew naturally. This company, Comoda, has existed since early 2010-11.
Yeah.
And as I said from the beginnings, it was very sort of natural in how we went about things. The guys that I have working for me, a lot of them, so the first plumber that I was speaking about and the Tyler, they still work for us.
Fantastic.
Wow.
Still do.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the people that work here have been here for many, many years. And I can't put a finger on why they do it.
Oh, I've got a feeling.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I know why.
I think I'm getting a picture as to why they're still with
It feels like a family, just from what you're saying as well.
I hate to use that term. Companies use that, oh, we're a family all the time. I don't even know how genuine that may sound. So I'm careful not to use that.
Yeah.
But I think there's, we have close to 45, 50 people who work on the regular for Comoda.
Yeah.
Internal staff, regular contractors, and then service providers who we work with on a daily basis, basically. We've gone from being a bathroom renovation company to a luxury bespoke renovation company, and that has happened over the last 5 years. Really, the acceleration of that has happened over the last 5 years, and within the organization we still hold true to some really core values, and I'm going to speak on that in the meeting that we're going to have. And our brand statement is your vision delivered. Right? So Comoda's brand statement is your vision delivered. It was an interesting pick for us when we were doing our branding, which was only about 3 or 4 years ago. And I specifically wanted something that wasn't about us, but it was about the other person.
Yeah.
Quite often we hear brand statements from companies embellishing themselves.
Yeah.
And I specifically wanted it to be about your vision. And I wanted the reader for that to apply to them. So if my team or my trades read it, I want that to be a truth statement for them.
Yes.
As it is a truth statement for our clients.
Yeah.
As it should be a truth statement for myself.
I love that story. I've heard a bit of that story when we first met, but thank you for sharing. All the way back from Sri Lanka to now having a successful, and I'm going to say it again, successful construction company here in Brisbane. We've got a few questions to ask you about leadership, if that's okay.
Far away.
So we talk about leadership in this podcast, and that you're a leader when other people choose to follow you. You're a manager when you've been given authority over other people. What makes somebody the sort of person that you'd be inspired to follow? So what would you say is a character trait that you would like to see in a leader that you would choose to follow?
Again, this may sound cliched. The leaders that I have looked up to have put core values of authenticity first. And if you put that out, then it's a choice for people to follow you in that path or not. I think it's hard when someone is inauthentic, if that's the word. And then it's really hard for people to judge who it is that they're following. Because you don't have to, that's authenticity, but it can be both ways. For me, I choose to be vulnerable and show vulnerability in front of my team, and to ask for help, and to not appear as a person in charge, but as Simon Sinek says, you have to take care of the people in your charge.
Yeah.
Right? That's your job.
Yeah.
So you were talking about in the travel part of your career, your travel career, you were talking about you were leading, but you didn't think you did it well, or you didn't really know what you were doing. Were there aspects of what you did back then that you'd still do now?
I went into a leadership culture headlock, I think it was, if I could say that. So it was going in and changing some of the standards that everybody believed was the standard and the norm. A simple thing would be, officers in Sri Lanka, they don't think twice about it, but they would all have water bottles that would be, say, a used alcohol bottle. Okay, and it's actually funny when you stop and think about why. And so I actually was, the first few weeks I was like, why is everyone having a absolute vodka bottle here or something? And it was almost a prestige thing to say, well, guess what? I've had this bottle. Now I'm choosing to use it as my water bottle. Here, have a look. And that would be one of my standout things. I gave you one thing that stood out. And I just sat and thought about it and looked at it and I went, this is bizarre, right? Because I have clients coming in and they're seeing your black label or whatever it is that you've decided to use as your water bottle. And I was like, guys, no, this is not happening. And when I explained it, it was actually a pushback because some of my staff, they were like, but don't you realize this is actually something
status thing.
This is a status thing. We should, all other big companies, they all have that. And it's just one quick example of something so small. And I was just completely oblivious to it. And I didn't realize and think through it at that time. I just was irritated by the fact that people had alcohol bottles empty with water in it.
Yeah.
But still, it wasn't a good look. And little things like that. But the loyalty and the camaraderie and the effort that people would go to achieve a goal that you set as a leader, or that sort of faith in your navigation and this implicit faith that they had was actually quite astounding. Nobody would say, I'm going to challenge you on that, or I'm not going to do that, or why should I? None of that. It was, so that to me was refreshing at the time. And now I look back at that and go, it's a cultural thing. People can easily exploit that as well. Whereas, one of the first things I didn't wanted to get rid of was people calling me sir, but because you're the boss or you're the manager. And I was like, please don't call me that because that's uncomfortable. But that was just their way of saying, I respect you.
Yes. Yeah.
So you started this whole story by talking about a philosophy of stoicism. I think you've displayed an incredible amount of stoicism throughout your life. If you could leave our listeners with one last lesson, one last life lesson or leadership lesson, I know I'm putting you on the spot here, but what would that be?
You can only work with what you have in your hand at that time, whatever that time may be.
I love that.
That is it.
Prince, I just want to say a big thank you. Thank you for sharing your story with us. It's a captivating story, and I think people can take a lot out of that just by listening to the way you've approached life, you've approached all of the adversity that you've faced and how you've overcome it.
And you've just not given up. It's that no matter what roadblocks or things were taken from you, it's just that, no, keep going. Keep going. And I have a saying, keep going until you can't. And that's a classic example of that. You're just like, no, you get a roadblock here, you turn here, you do.
Yeah.
And
I said this to someone once who said, how bad could things actually be if I had the absolute chance of being killed and that didn't happen? How much, whatever the circumstance that you can throw at me, would that possibly be worse than that? And if that is a no, then I'm okay with that.
Well, I think the Stoics would be very proud to have you as part of their community.
that's right, yeah.
Prince, thank you so much.
Thank you guys
for your time.
so much.
Thank you.
It was such a pleasure to be with you today.
I've still got goosebumps happening. Thanks, Prince.
And so can you just leave us a bit of information about Comoda? How do people get in touch with you and find Comoda?
Comoda is servicing the greater Brisbane area. As I said, we do bespoke renovations and we also do medical centres and allied health practices. And you can find us at comoda.com.au or on our Instagram, comoda.renovations.
And that's COMODA.com.
Comoda.
That's right.
All right.
Yeah.
Prince, thank you again.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Cheers. So, Michelle, where can they find us?
CaptainandtheClown.com.
Where you'll find links to our websites for keynote speaking and corporate training.
Yes, that's CaptainandtheClown.com. Well, that was fun.
That was fun.
You're such a clown.
The clown.
Lady Captain. There we go.
And who's going to listen to this? Maybe our mums.
Thanks, Mum.